Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Okay, brothers, we're going to carry on, inshallah, from where we left off last week. So where did we leave off last week? Who can remember?
Was it discussing positivism? Or?
Okay, so let's summarize what we've discussed so far. Who's been every single lesson? Tariq, mashallah. Okay. What did we do session 1?
Was it worldviews?
Worldviews, yeah. And the importance of worldviews, and we defined worldviews. What was after that?
How these ism and schism deprive from enlightening.
Yeah. So we looked at the history of...
Yeah, and then we came through all of each of them. What does it mean? And
Yeah. So we looked at liberalism, the liberal, secular, modern worldview, the dominant worldview, and how it came to be, basically. How it became to be the most dominant worldview. We looked at the history, the Enlightenment. Prior to the Enlightenment, we had the scientific revolution. Prior to that, you had the Renaissance. And then, going back to... We looked at Muslim history briefly as well, and how it may have contributed to this. Last session, what did we do? Do you remember?
Yeah, we spoke about from where we got our worldview. That's wahya, that's revelation, that's experiment, and that's all these things. And from where the Westerners, or let's say people who believe on science, and their worldview is based on science and experiment. That's still limited, it's quite limited, and our worldview is wider.
Yes.
And it's wise, and we spoke about this.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so we looked at briefly... So we started looking at the crises of modernity. And we looked at the first crisis, which was the crisis of knowledge. And the way we defined it was that although there's been brilliant progress as far as science and technology is concerned, the crisis has been in regards to the limits of what routes of knowledge are considered to be valid, basically. So science or empiricism and rationalism were front and center, and all others were generally rejected. Right? So yes, we've made a lot of progress in these domains, but you have cut yourself off from all other forms of knowledge as well. And like you said, we compared this or juxtaposed it briefly to the Islamic perspective, and we saw our sort of corpus of routes to knowledge are far more extensive. So we have revelation, empiricism, rationalism, the fitra, right? And so on and so forth. So that's where we left off last week. Today what we're going to look at is what we're going to do, a couple of things. We're going to finish off, hopefully, the other crises we're going to look at. So the crisis of meaning, the crisis of morality, and the crisis, what's the third crisis? Who can remember? Knowledge?
Economy?
No. There's knowledge?
Social?
No. Crisis of knowledge, crisis of meaning, crisis of morality. And there was one more. Crisis of identity. Yeah, so we're going to try to look at all of those. So we're going to go into meaning now. Now, so basically when it comes to the meaning, we've discussed this a few times already, to some extent. But what is the biggest problem? What would you guys say? So when it comes to the meaning of life, the ultimate meaning of life, why is it a problem for modernity?
They look at things kind of from subjective point of view, which makes it difficult to really say what is meaningful if everything can be equally meaningful.
Yeah, so it's subjective.
Yeah.
Because look, when you have your worldview doesn't include the divine, right, or revelation from the divine, naturally you have some limits now, right? Because now your information and your knowledge is coming from what source?
From
the human
himself.
mind, right? Now if you're relying upon human minds, well then it's subjective. It's subject to the human being or the group of human beings. And that also applies to the ultimate meaning of life, right? So
it's limited as well.
Yeah, so it's limited. So and this is why if you look at the philosophers who have discussed the meaning of life and gone into this subject, normally they address and tackle the meaning in life, that question, as opposed to the meaning of life. So there's two, they break it into two categories. Because the meaning of life question, the ultimate meaning of life, why do we exist, that is a very tricky subject for them, right? And we're going to break this down further. Generally speaking, it's because, well, if you don't believe in a higher power, creator, or revelation from this creator, well, then you won't know what your ultimate meaning is, right? So they normally tackle the meaning in life. Okay, so what do you think they mean by the meaning in life? What is the meaning in life?
Could be to do with purpose, like.
Yeah, it's definitely to do with purpose.
So, finding ways to do things that feel that you're fulfilling your purpose.
Yes, yeah. So they basically, what they're looking at is what is the meaning in our lives. So what are we going to give ourselves? What are we going to do? Right? So what is your life about basically?
I'd add another limitation of it is that you're trying to find the meaning in the material world, and the meaning you're going to put to that material can change in any second. And that's why there is that crisis, is because it's so invaluable, because how easy it is to change. Unlike the divine, which is constant, there is no change to that meaning. So there's that level of, you can say,
fluidity.
Peacefulness as a believer, because of the meaning so concrete. While the other has a crisis because it can change in any second. There's a shakiness to his belief.
Yes, there's no grounding. So there's no ultimate grounding. There's no objective anchor. So you're left with this fluid state where everything is in flow and changing constantly. So this is why this is another way of looking at the. So even the meaning in life is in flow, but the meaning of life, you can't find it, right? And it's literally as simple as this. There is no God, there is no creator. That means everything that exists, the entire universe and everything within the universe is an accident. Right? There was no intention behind it. There's no intentionality behind it. It wasn't intended by an external being to be the way it is. We just happen to exist in this universe. So that means we're here by chance. So the question of what is the ultimate meaning of life, well, really there isn't any, right? If we're being very honest. What is the meaning in life question is much easier to deal with, because this is something you can now sit down and reflect upon and give yourself, right? So you can come up with your own meaning, essentially, right? And this is what most people focus on. And this is why you see that there was a, huge movement in the 19th century, early 20th century of existentialist philosophers. Right? Who can name some of the existentialist philosophers?
Is it Nietzsche?
Nietzsche, yeah, you could say it was an existentialist philosopher, yeah.
Albert Camus?
Camus, yeah. Any others? Camus, Nietzsche. There's one more, there was a few, but we're missing a prominent one, probably considered to be the father of existentialism.
Name. It was like John or something.
Yeah, Jean-Paul Sartre.
John,
Sartre.
Yeah, so he was one of the main figures, right? And there's an interesting quote by him. He said, "Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. It is up to you to give life a meaning." He literally just sums it up, right? That you are here, you are free. It's interesting the words they used if you analyze them, right? Because this whole notion we're talking about, there is no ultimate meaning of life. You have to make up your own meaning. When you speak about it like this, it sounds very morbid, right? And depressing. But you see the existentialists, what they did was they were very clever and careful with the words that they chose and the language they used. Because they almost tried to spin it as something positive. So you can see Sartre here speaks about you are born free. You create your own meaning, right? So this type of language they used because they wanted to empower people, because they saw after people moved away from religion and God, and seeing all the the wars and all of the atrocities and stuff like this, they were in a very depressed state. So the people are looking for meaning, and that's why when the existentialists came around, everyone just they became almost like superstars basically. Right, because they were giving people what they wanted. You see a similar phenomenon. I mean, if you look at it from a contemporary example perspective, Jordan Peterson, right? Very similar sort of type of phenomenon that's taken place, where there was a gap or a void within society. Young men felt lost. They didn't know what the meaning of their life was, what they were doing, where they were going, what direction their life should be going in. Here comes on stage Jordan Peterson, right? And he talks about these things, exactly the topic what people are concerned with, and people start following him. And he becomes extremely famous and popular. And if you really analyze Jordan Peterson's concepts and philosophies and ideas, what you'd see is that it's existentialism, just repackaged. That's what he's done. He's repackaged existentialism, right? So they became very famous and popular, and one of their main objectives was to really try to inject some meaning back into people's lives, right? So you had Sartre, who spoke about responsibility, creating your own meaning, your own destiny. Nietzsche, someone mentioned Nietzsche. What was Nietzsche's sort of contributions, would you say? Nihilism, yes. Yeah, he definitely spoke about nihilism and the problem of nihilism. But what was his sort of solution? What was his sort of positive contribution?
Was it just to destroy everything, just to start from scratch?
Yeah, you can say he took that approach
There's
in his philosophy.
You have to, as you said, invent your own meaning. There's no right and wrong or something like this. I think it's subjective.
No, you're on the right track. Yeah,
Right.
because he literally, in many ways, did say exactly what you said, which was to start from scratch, right? Reject everything else, these imposed directives on people, and create your own meaning. So he came up with this concept of the Übermensch, or the Superman, this perfect human being, who creates his own morals, his own ethical code, his own direction in life, right? And he's empowered, and he's like a leader figure. And so they created these types of ideas and concepts. Now, what's very interesting, Iqbal as well, he had a similar concept. Yeah, you've read Iqbal, bro, haven't you?
Yeah.
So Iqbal had do you remember what his was called? Iqbal had a similar concept of like the Superman.
What's the Shaheen?
He used different words.
The khudi is like...
Khudi, yeah, was
And
yeah,
then
khudi was what is developed within
within
the Muslim,
yeah.
right? That the Muslim should basically endeavor towards developing within themselves, so they can become empowered in the world. But there was also this concept which surrounded this of Mard Mu'min, this perfect man, or the believing man, right? And obviously this figure of this man was someone who was a believer, a mu'min who believed in Allah, who developed his khudi, right? Really developed his khudi. Now the concept of khudi is very interesting as well. Many people say Iqbal copied Nietzsche in this, but when you look at the literature, it doesn't seem to be the case. He may have been inspired with the sort of framework to use, but if you look at Iqbal's believing man and Nietzsche's Übermensch or Superman, they're very different, right? Because Iqbal's believing man, this character, he's a deeply religious person, someone connected with Allah, someone who worships Allah, someone therefore doing this has really discovered himself and developed himself to the point where he can now go and change the world, right? So it's a very spiritual concept. Nietzsche's was very irreligious, it was non-religious, his concept of the perfect man. Yeah, so it's totally different. Sure, there may have been some inspiration as far as concepts were concerned, like a framework or to use, but as far as what they are, they're very different, right? So that was Nietzsche. Then you had Camus. Camus was slightly different. There were other existentialists, but I think Camus was quite a contrast to the sort of more traditional existentialists such as Sartre and Nietzsche, although Nietzsche and Sartre were quite different as well. But Camus was what they refer to as an absurdist, right? Now, he had this whole concept of absurdism, which was basically, in a nutshell, what he was saying is that life has no ultimate meaning, but you can't help but search for meaning, right? So you're in this constant struggle where you know there is no meaning, but you can't help look for meaning, and you're constantly just pushing this rock up a hill. The sort of myth of Sisyphus, right? You're constantly just struggling against this thing, but you know that, so it says you're in this absurdity. No meaning, but you're looking for meaning, and you can't help but look for meaning. There's I'll read you the quote. There's an interesting quote he said as well. So hear what he says here. The literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself. It's very interesting, right? So he realized that, it was a very depressing state of people right? That they don't know what the meaning is. So for him, the meaning of, he knew there was no ultimate meaning of life. There was no meaning. So for him, what he's saying is, whatever stops you from killing yourself, that's the meaning of your life. Whatever that is, yeah? Just do that. Now that's quite a depressing way of looking at it, right? Because what does that mean? What does that tell us about meaning?
Subjective again.
It's subjective. It's basically, it's just whatever keeps you alive, right? If drinking keeps you alive, keep drinking. If smoking keeps you alive, keep smoking, right? If committing crimes keeps you alive, keep committing crimes, you know? Do whatever you want. So he was more of a, he wasn't as optimistic, if you like, as the others, but you get the general sense of what these existentialists were dealing with. They had a very difficult task, almost an impossible task, I'd say, which is to give human beings ultimate meaning without God, which is impossible, right? Now, back then, people would still reflect and think about these things, right? About the meaning of life and the purpose of life, because back then there weren't these many distractions as we have today, right? Now the world is a very different place. Right? Now it's almost like you're constantly distracted. You got so many distractions that most people don't worry about these things. What is the meaning of life? Most people don't philosophize or think about these things. Yeah, people that do think about these things, they're seen as quite strange, right? Most people just go have fun, enjoy yourself, spend time with friends, party, spend money, hedonism basically. Enjoy yourself. Yeah, don't worry about these things. So that's why most people don't appreciate these things as much. However, it still is a problem because at some point people do think about these questions. Everyone does. What's the meaning of my life? It could be a crisis in their life. They can go through, a loss of, family, or something may happen, a tragedy, a trial in their life that gets them to reflect upon these things. And then COVID was a good example, right? Apparently during the COVID pandemic, the rates of depression skyrocketed, right? But they didn't obviously advertise this as much. But people were depressed. People were looking for the meaning of life. Because look, think about it. There was actually an experiment done. I read this a while back where they got some very busy businessmen and CEOs, right, that were constantly on the go, and they put them in a room without anything to do. No phones, no distractions. Put them in a room for a few hours. And some of them almost went crazy. Because when you separate people from all the distractions, that's when they start thinking, like, okay, what am I doing in this life? What is it all about? Where am I going? What's my direction? And that's what happened in COVID, because what did COVID do? It cut people off from their daily lives, the things they were used to, the distractions. Everything was closed down, lockdown. So people were sitting there and thinking about these things. And if you look at it from a sort of liberal, secular, atheistic, worldview, like we said, there are no answers. You're not going to find answers. The best you can do is make it up for yourself. Now, how would you, so say if someone says to you, there's no ultimate meaning of life. I'll just, make up my own meaning. How would you address someone like that? What could you say to them?
Again, based on what? No, see.
They just say, no, I just do what I'll make up my own meaning. I'll just come up with something. I'm okay with that. How could you address such a... What do you think is going on there?
I think...
You see, it's quite a tricky type of situation, because you got a person here now who's comfortable in their misery.
Yeah, but I would say,
Right?
how would you justify that that's whatever for you is meaningful is also meaningful for others?
They'll say it isn't. My meaning is my meaning. Your meaning is your meaning. Everyone has their own meaning. I'm okay with that.
It has a contradiction, so...
Yeah, your meaning will contradict my meaning. It's okay.
What about telling him about the harms of his whatever he's looking at life?
You can tackle it that way. So you can tackle his specific meaning.
Identify problems with his meaning.
Yeah. But say if there isn't any, so that can be the case. Say if you speak to someone that just wants to do charity work, right, and help the poor, and that's the meaning. That's the meaning they give their life. Let's be nuanced with this. Not everything is, black and white.
There are people that do that.
Yeah, there are definitely people that do that.
They attach themselves to a particular cause, whether it's animal rights or something.
Yes.
Some people dedicate themselves to protecting dogs, or cats or something like that. So
yeah,
it's just strange.
Do you think this leads to both crises, the crisis of meaning and identity? The way you're saying it's like about the animals and dogs, charity. Maybe this like their identities that I like to help people, I like to help animals. Maybe try to tackle both of them. For example, to show them truly that these meanings that you're putting yourself can change and that they're fluid, and show them that maybe you 10 years ago didn't believe in this, or 10 years in the future you're not going to believe in this. So why are you so comfortable with it today?
So it's good. So one thing you can do is you can highlight that whatever meaning you're giving yourself, it's something you've made up, right? It wasn't the case several years ago. It may not be the case in the next 5 years. You may change again. So that means that the meaning you've made up for yourself is really not grounded in anything. It's ephemeral, right? So it's on shaky grounds. So what you're doing is you're committing your entire life to something that you've just constructed in your mind. Now that concept is quite problematic, right? Because you're dedicating so much time and effort to something that you just made up for yourself. Why do that, right? They may say, well, I feel it deeply that this is the right thing to do. In that case, you can go to the moral dilemma, which is how do you know it's the right thing to do? Based on what? How do you ground it, right? So that's one way you can tackle it. The other thing you can do is you can highlight to them the importance of ultimate meaning, right? Because let's think about this. Why is ultimate meaning important in the first place? That's another big question, right? It has to be important for it to be a crisis, right? Is ultimate meaning important? Having ultimate meaning important?
We can challenge the idea of this meaning that they have, the made-up meaning. So it's temporary. So what if you die then? What's the purpose of life after that?
Yeah.
And what is the purpose of life you have been given, not made up by you? So if he's a Christian, let's say, or he's somebody who believes on religious things, then we can argue with him on a religious basis. Otherwise, we can challenge him from another perspective, and we can come to the real purpose of life, not only for him, for the whole humanity, for the whole universe, for Earth, everything. So we can easily challenge them by telling them that we have been given a purpose to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you find the meaning in doing a charity work, so tomorrow you might be in a position that you hate charity work.
Yeah.
So then you lost all your morality. It's
Yeah.
temporary. So it should be a purpose. The purpose always should be a long term, not a short term. So if you achieved it, then morality is finished then.
Yeah.
So what's the next stage?
Yeah, you can take it that way as well. So, yeah.
For your question is asking, why is the ultimate meaning good? Maybe you would give an example. For example, a lot of people using the da'wah, if you're randomly taken into a train and just tossed into the train, wouldn't it be the first few questions you'll ask? Like, who put me here?
Yes.
Where am I going? What am I doing here? Let's say there's 5-star Michelin food in front of you. Let's say those are the best distractions in the world. But these things will plague your mind. It's like, because these are the main things. And I'm not sure how it's said. With the why, every how is possibly answered. But without that why...
I think Nietzsche said that, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
That first why. So that ultimate meaning, that why, is which allows us to grow and to build everything else.
Yeah, it has to be grounded.
Yeah.
Right? So, like you said, if you were to wake up on a train right now, right, and it was just going at 100 miles an hour, and you don't know how you got there, who put you there, where the train's going, no matter how many luxuries you have in the train, you're not going to be comfortable. Because you don't have the answers to those fundamental questions.
Where I'm going?
Yeah, where am I going? Who put me on the train? Who put me here? Why did they put me here? Right? So without the answers, you're not going to be happy. Right?
It will be a constant life of anxiety.
Yeah, and imagine in that scenario, you said to yourself, no, there are no answers. Yeah, it makes no sense. No one put me here. The train's not going anywhere. How? That's nonsense, because the train is going somewhere. It's moving.
That itself is a crisis.
Yeah, that is a crisis. That's more of a, it's on the realms of madness almost, yeah? That would be absurd to say that no one put you on the train's not going anywhere, and there's no objective behind it, right? There are questions, because look, we're moving through life. We haven't always existed. We haven't been here for an eternity. We came into existence at a point, all of us, and you exit at a point, right? And between the entrance and exit, you're going through serial time, you're moving, right? Like the train is moving. To say that you didn't come from nowhere, no one put you here, you're not here for no reason, and you're going nowhere is quite absurd, right? There's no reason to believe such a suggestion, right? And that itself challenges that worldview that can't comprehensively address these questions. The other thing you can also highlight is that, look, everything as human beings, we function with meaning and purpose. You wake up in the morning with a meaning or a purpose behind it. You have breakfast with a purpose. You put your clothes on with a purpose. You brush your teeth with a purpose. You leave your house with a purpose. You work with a purpose. You have lunch with a purpose. You come home for a purpose. You go to sleep for a purpose. Everything you do is with purpose. If you're an engineer, when you design things with a purpose. Which engineer just design things for the sake of designing things? No one. You don't just say, I'm going to design something which has no meaning or purpose. It's always got meaning. Scientists, when they do science, they're always looking for the purpose and meaning behind things. So we function with meaning as human beings. Everything has a meaning, right? In this room even, if you look at all the stuff around us that's made, man-made if you like, it has a function and a purpose. There's nothing superfluous, right? Here. Everything. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find something that doesn't have an objective or a purpose. But yet when it comes to our existence, we say there is no meaning or there's no ultimate purpose. It doesn't make sense. We just don't function like that as human beings. And that's why that question of purpose and meaning is so ingrained and deep within us that we need to know. And life just doesn't fully make sense without it. And distracting yourself and giving yourself all of these ideas that, I want to do this, or I make up my own purpose and I create my own meaning. These are just distractions. They're only short-lived. They'll work for a little while and then you'll be like, because think about it. Imagine someone says, my purpose is to do charity work, to help the poor, and I'm going to sacrifice my life I'm going to go to, say, Africa or Asia and spend the next 20 years of my life there. That's a lot of sacrifice, right? That's a lot of commitment, sacrifice, effort, energy, right? At some point, you're going to be like, well, why put in all this effort for an idea that I've just made up for myself? Why is this intrinsically valuable and meaningful and moral and ethical? On atheism or secularism, on any godless worldview, you cannot intrinsically ground it. It's just an idea. Or it may be a compulsion or a feeling or a need that you want to do this, but you can't justify it. That's not to say you shouldn't. These are good things, no doubt. But we're just saying, look at the deeper point here, which is you still have no ultimate meaning. You're just here and you die and you're an accident. That's it. So this is a big crisis, and many people, are struggling with this. The crisis of identity is another one. What do you think the issue here is when we say crisis of identity?
Who we are.
Yeah, who we are. At least that's one aspect of it, right? What are we? Who are we? So what do you think? How does a godless perspective address that question? Okay, so maybe look at it through the figures. How would Richard Dawkins answer that question if you asked him?
Is it? Sorry, you could possibly say, well, they say, like the mayor says, you can be who you want to be, and love who you want to love. They mention that, so you can invent an identity for yourself.
Yeah.
So you can, you can even pretend to be an animal or something like that.
Yeah, so that's the other aspect of it. So there's two parts of this, if you like. One part is, well, what are we, fundamentally? And the other part is, well, what do you want to be then? If you don't, if there's no grounding to it. So we can discuss both aspects of it. But let's start with the fundamental one first. What are we, according to, the modern Western secular worldview?
Evolved Homo sapiens.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. That's a nice way of putting it. Evolved Homo sapiens, anything else?
Random collection of atoms.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if you take a very reductionist, naturalist look at it, we're just a compilation of atoms and molecules.
Would you say part of identity crisis like saying who your people are? who are the people, يعني, who am I connecting to?
That could
Part of
be
it.
that's a part of it as well. Yeah, no
'Cause
doubt.
sometimes you see, let's for example here in the UK, football teams.
Yeah.
That's a large identity for a lot of people, which actually some people get too emotional for.
Tribalism.
Yeah, it's tribalism. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, see that's one way. But I think when I refer to identity, I'm looking at more of the core, the essence of the human being. What is the human, right? Because if you don't know what you are, then the same thing with the problem with meaning. If you don't have ultimate meaning, then you just make up meaning for yourself, right? So their definition is, there some would say you're an intelligent animal, right? If you take a sort of snapshot of history, if you go back for a little while, if you go to the three major philosophers of classical, philosophy, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, has anyone looked at what their conceptions of the self were, what the self is? So Socrates didn't write anything pretty much himself, right? Plato was Socrates' student, so Plato did pretty much he penned down all of Socrates' ideas, right? And so have anyone looked into this? Have you looked into this? Okay, what do you think these guys would have said? It would be interesting to know. I could tell you all three had similar views in regards to the idea of the self. Although you can say Socrates and Plato were closer, and then Aristotle obviously was a student of Plato, but he moved away from many of Plato's ideas. What do you think their view was on this?
Aristotle said we were like collection of atoms or something.
No.
Which one had the concept of the perfect world with every?
Plato.
It's Plato.
Yeah,
So
he
wouldn't
had
he
his
say
own-
maybe there's out there that perfect human being that we're all trying to emulate?
Yeah, the world of forms basically. Yeah, I don't know if it will be linked to that. It'd be interesting to sort of discuss that. But let's get to his definition first. How would he, what did he see the human being as?
I mean, can you mention
What do you
about
think?
the sort of essence of things?
Good. So they spoke about the essence of
The
things.
essence, which is like people are born with that.
Everything has an essence.
Everything has an
Yeah.
essence. So. Could
Yeah.
that
So
be
essence. The idea was essence precedes existence.
existence. Yeah.
The existentialists flipped that. The existentialist said existence precedes essence. So they flipped the script basically.
Was that similar to our Islamic view with regard to the fitra?
Yeah, 100%. That's good analysis, bro. I would say it's closer to what we believe, which is that the human being has an essence. We have the soul, we have the fitra, etc. Yeah.
Is it? Do you know how he said that existence precedes essence? Is that why for them, they're philosophically allowed to play with what the essence is, and they can
Exactly.
change?
Yep.
They got rid of God,
Yeah.
so they had to make that change.
Yeah. But instead of seeing it as a depressing thing, they saw it as a very powerful thing.
Freedom.
Yeah. Freedom. Like you are God basically.
Yeah.
You create your own reality. You create your own meaning. You create your own world. So you can see how you could spin it in a very positive way, but the problems still remain. They don't go anywhere, right? So Socrates, we can talk Plato mainly, but Plato had this notion that the human being is made of is duality basically. You have the soul, the human has a soul, and he has the physical body. Now you have to remember this is pre-Christianity, so their concept of the soul was different compared to the sort of religious Christian understanding of the soul. But he had an understanding that there was a soul and there was a body. And the soul was the essence of the being, the person. And then Plato further broke it down into three parts. Let me see if I can remember them. The first part was the rational soul. The second was the spiritual. And the third was, I've got it here somewhere. Let me see if I can. Rational, spiritual, and the appetite. I can't remember the word, but it was to do with the appetites, basically, the third part of the soul, right? So these three parts made up the soul, and the central part was the rational soul for the human being, right? But he had this clear distinction. There was soul and there was body. The soul was immaterial and eternal, and the body was material and it was finite, right? The body disintegrated and the soul continued on, right? So he had a very clear conception of the self, of the human being. Yeah, very similar in many ways, very similar. Allah knows best, because we know there's many prophets I'm not saying Plato was a prophet, but we know there's many, and many weren't named, right? So maybe he came after a prophet, you know. So he may have got some of the ideas from a previous prophet that lived before him, because these ideas are very similar. So there may be some chain that goes back to a prophet that lived maybe, you know, 100 years, 200 years, Allah knows best, before the advent of Plato. But the point is, they had this conception of essence before existence, and the soul was there, right? Aristotle was very similar as well, although Aristotle said that the human being has a soul, right? But he still labeled or defined the human being as an intelligent animal, right? But according to Aristotle, every living thing had a soul. Trees, animals, all of them had souls, right? That's what made them living, right? So but he still defined the human being as an intelligent animal. That's the label he gave the human being, right? Because again, their understanding of soul was very different, right? But the point is that you can see there was a slight shift away from sort of this idea of a soul, an immaterial spiritual entity within a human being, towards more of a materialistic type of understanding as time went by. Fast forward many, many centuries, you get to the period of, then you obviously had Christianity for a very long time, and they had the conception of the soul, which was dominant. People believed in the soul and the physical body, there's two parts. Then during the period of the Enlightenment and the, you know, especially the existentialists, you see them flip. Like we said, they went existence first and then essence. So you're born without an essence. They didn't talk about the soul much, the existentialists or the Enlightenment thinkers. They mainly focus on the physical, the material being, the material human being living in a material world. And obviously the idea of intelligent animal continued, but now the meaning of an intelligent animal is different from the way Aristotle understood it. When they said intelligent animal, they meant just a physical material being. And then you fast forward a little lot more, then you come to the new atheists. Obviously we're missing out big chunks here, but the new atheists, people like Dawkins and Harris and these guys, the soul was completely gone. There is no soul, right? It's an illusion, like consciousness. It's just the physical being. You are a physical being. Okay? That's not created, that has no creator. So now think about this. Here's how they're defining the human being. A human being is an accidental byproduct of an accident, which is the universe. And a human being is just comprised of atoms and molecules. It's just an arrangement of atoms and molecules. There is no soul. There is just the physical being that has a physical brain that produces or creates an illusion, which is consciousness. There is no soul anymore, right? This is the identity of a human being foundationally. Okay, now if this is how you define a human being, what does this do? This leads us to the second part, which is how do you identify yourself now? Right? What's happening today in the world? What with the whole, you know,
Gender.
yeah, identity is a big thing for people, right?
It's fluid.
Fluid, yeah. You be what you want to be. You become what you want to become. As far as your identity, right? It's you can see how it all leads up to now where we are today. The modernists, they, you know, like we said, they still try to maintain some rules and boundaries, right? So intelligent animal, and they'll leave it at that. We're human beings. That's what they would say, yeah. But the postmodernist, new age guys, you know, for them, no, you can be whatever you want to be. You know, you want to be a star, you can be a star. You want to be a cloud, you can be a cloud. You want to be an animal, choose whatever animal you want to choose. Be that animal, right? It's crazy. Right? You want to be a table or a chair, you know, be my guest, be whatever you want to be. Right? It's crazy if you think about it, right? Where do you think, I mean, we don't need to discuss this, but you can see where this is eventually going to keep going, you know, if we stay on this trajectory. Right? It's crazy when you start to think about
The
this.
difference between animal and human being.
Yeah, and then you have transhuman movement as well, right? Our brother in the AI, who works in AI, could probably, you know, this whole idea of, you know, integrating biology with machines, you know, and technology.
Digital twins of humans.
Yeah.
So they would be basically your copy, and you can basically make it do anything.
Yeah, yeah. And even people today, they're getting these chips inserted into them, right? I think Elon Musk recently, they had this chip thing that they started to implant in people's Neuralink, yeah. Yeah, there's other people have had chips in their hands, magnets put in, all this crazy stuff, right? To almost sort of advance the human race. And some people think this is the next stage of evolution for human beings. Where's this techno-human now, you know? It's crazy. It is really crazy. We're not even talking about right and wrong here right now. We're just looking at sort of the trajectory of where this is all going. And how if you turn away from God and revelation, it's an open playing field, right? Anything goes. This is why we shouldn't really be surprised with when you see all of this stuff happening, right? Concern is another thing, but surprise, I mean, there's no need to be surprised with this stuff. We can see how it's all evolved to this point. Same thing with morality, right? What would you say the crisis of morality is now?
So it's completely, well, in the West, it's gone towards hedonism, like extreme hedonism now.
Yeah.
So,
But what's the issue? So why can't we have, like, why is it a crisis? Why can't people just come up with their own, you know, with morality and moral rules and laws and ethics? We're intelligent, right? What's the problem there?
because human beings, the more, to be honest, the more freedom you give them, the more mess they make of everything. And if you look at, for example, all the great empires, they started off like the Roman or Persian Empire. The people had a particular drive. They were dynamic, and then when they became successful, the hedonism took over, and then it led to their eventual collapse. It's like a cycle throughout history, and we're going through the decline of the Western Empire, as it were, because of exactly the same reasons. It's like the blueprint that goes throughout history.
Yep. So definitely, so having luxury and, you know, wealth and power can corrupt, no doubt, right? But let's look at the foundations of morals and ethics.
It's not intrinsically coherent. Like, just because we're intelligent and we said this is good, this is wrong. But why?
Yeah.
Why? Even if you're not intelligent, why should I believe an intelligent person over a non-intelligent person on morality? Why is that?
That's the problem. It's subjective,
Yeah.
right? So morality in the absence of God is subjective, or revelation is subjective, because it's one person's ideas pegged up against another person's ideas. You know, so think about this scenario. Say you have one person that says, you know, I don't know, hypothetical crazy scenario. One person says, you know, kidnapping old men over 70 every Tuesday is a good thing to do. Yeah? And the other person says, no, it's a bad thing to do. Right? So you got two people, one saying this is good, one saying this is bad. Who's right?
So it's like, I think we have rules and regulation. Like, let's take police rules. There are certain rules, laws. If everybody make their own laws, so how will be this society
So you need
functioning?
authority, one thing. That's one thing, right?
There should be one place who should give all these direction for moral and everything.
Yeah.
And then people should follow. Otherwise, if everybody make up their own rules and regulation laws, so the society will not function.
Okay, good. So let's go down this trail of thought now. So you're saying there should be authority that decides, because if everyone starts deciding what's right and wrong, then there's a chaos. Yeah. So, but what is what issues still do we still face? Say a group of people get together.
Yeah, how would you stress the authority instead of? I mean, that authority would be still limited.
Yeah, of course. It's just
which is wrong and which is right.
exactly. So even if you have 10 people or 100 people coming together, you're still subjective. It's subject to the human beings. You know, you can have a group in the UK deciding what's right, say on a certain given topic, and a group, say somewhere in Asia, same number of people, they come to a totally different moral conclusion. Who's right, who's wrong? Same problem still. Why? Because there's no objective anchor. It's all subjective. Right? It's not that human beings can't make an effort and sometimes get some things right. That's not the point. Of course they can. But the point is you can't objectively ground it. You know, it's impossible to objectively ground it. It's all subjective. Right? There's a very interesting quote by Darwin. Let's see if I can find it. Where he talks about, you know, if we were reared under the same conditions as the hive bees. Has anyone heard that quote before? Where is it? Yeah, so he says, if, for instance, to take an extreme case, men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. So essentially what he's getting at, it's if you put here, what he's highlighting here is if you say that morality is pegged upon evolution, right? So we evolved, morality evolved. That's one of the arguments they can make. Well, then it's still not objective because it's subject to evolution. It will continue to change, right? So here he's giving an example. You know, if you were reared under these specific conditions, you would think these things to be okay, and no one would think anything wrong of mothers trying to kill their fertile daughters, etc. So even if it's subjective, it'll keep changing. Like your fingernails and your hair on your body and stuff. As these things evolve, your moral outlook would also evolve. So it doesn't make it objective. It's just subject to evolution now, right? So you see this within liberal discourse as well, that they don't really agree upon a standard of, you know, there's different forms of liberalism and they have their own moral outlooks, right? So it's all subjective. Again, without God, without religion, without revelation, you cannot claim an objective grounding for morality. This is a big problem. And this is why you see things that are being accepted today as morally good or right, only 10 years ago, they will be seen as wrong. Right? And I guarantee in the next 10 years, what's considered bad today will be considered right. Right? Krauss did it in Hamza's debate. I don't know if you guys remember, when Hamza asked him about incest. Yeah, and you can see how he's just rationalizing the whole thing. It's crazy, right? That if there's consent and there's no harm or damage or anything, then I don't see, you know, anything wrong with it. And you can see how, you know, look, there's two things. There's a moral idea, and then there's this human, what could you say, attachment to the idea. So, for example, some things you hear about, like incest, it's abhorrent, it feels wrong. There's a feeling attached, there's a sense attached to it, right? That this is wrong, you feel it, right? What's happening in society, you'll see, like this whole thing about incest with Krauss's debate, which happened about 9 years ago or something, 10 years ago. At the time, it was like crazy. I mean, if someone did that today, I wouldn't be surprised if people react less offended than they did back then, right? It's because over time, when you have this open playing field, first the rules change slowly, and then people become accustomed to it. They become used to it. It's human nature. Over time, it'll be accepted, right? Like many things today are accepted that were seen as abhorrent, even 10 years, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And this is another problem. Like, where are people going? Where is it going to go? Where is it going to end? I mean, we don't need to give our thoughts on that right now, but the point is, you can see the problems with these things. And like Tariq pointed out, if you look at civilizations in the past, great civilizations, why did they collapse? There are some common trends and patterns you see. Right? Luxury, indulgence, and moral decay were the result of, fundamentally, these were sort of the main things behind the collapse of civilizations. Right? When civilizations morally degraded, they eventually collapsed.
There was a general in the beginning, well, not the beginning, well, during the Roman Empire, there was one general who conquered Syria, and that became the richest province before Egypt of Rome. And they described his bathroom, it was Cato the Elder, he was the general, and his bathroom was the size of a telephone booth. And he didn't have just a small hole in the wall. And this was a great general, he used to work on the fields himself. And, 100 or 200 years later, those same generals had bathrooms that were as big as, an entire district, So they went from having great men who were, very stoic and strong, and they they let luxury destroy them. In the end, they couldn't fight. They had to employ mercenaries. The Germanic people became the Roman soldiers, and the empire fell in on itself because of luxuries.
Yeah, I think that kind of similar thing happened to Muslims as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you analyze it, like whoever's read Islamic history, I mean, share some thoughts, guys. What do you think? Like, what do you think? There were obviously many reasons behind the decline of the Muslim empire, Islamic empire, but what were the main sort of themes. Yeah.
Dunya, yeah, luxury. Like Hassan al-Basri, he was at the time of Umayyads. He talks about it, how kind of the leaders at that time got into like the worldly things. They started like bringing musicians, women, alcohol into their palaces, and doing all sorts of stuff. I think only one leader later on that came was, if I'm not wrong, Umar Abdulaziz, the second Umar. He changed things quite a bit, but then he was killed because at that time everyone wanted to go back to their kind of luxury life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. This is.
There's a story of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu about, so basically now the Muslims have the power, now they're opening fronts with the Persians and the Romans, and then there was Amr ibn al-As, another Sahabi who was fighting in Egypt to liberate it, and basically he was taking more than usual, longer than usual. We need to remember at that time the Muslims were not that strong, but he was taking more than usual though. So Umar al-Khattab sent him a message saying, I'm afraid that the worldly life is getting into your heart, Amr ibn al-As. Why are you taking so long? And this is a time where we weren't that much, but he's saying, hurry up. Right?
Yeah.
This Roman Empire, the great Roman Empire. And he's telling him, the only reason you're failing is because the dunya is in your heart. And then Amr ibn al-As sent him a message back and told him, I need more people. And he sent him 4 people. He said, each one of these people are worth 1,000. So, and then Egypt was taken shortly after. But yeah, so Umar al-Khattab saw as the reason of the failure is having, you can say materialistic life, or when you take too much care of the world of the living.
SubhanAllah. That's such a powerful point as well, because, he sent 4 people, one each equivalent of 1,000. It just shows you how men were defined. What makes a man, right? It wasn't their material possessions or their wealth or the nice cars they drive or the nice camels they rode, I guess, back in the day. What made a man? That's another very powerful topic. Honor, mashallah, Brother Tariq's writing a book, may Allah bless him. Where is the honor these days, bro? I mean, even forget the non-Muslims, bro. Where's the honor amongst our Muslim brothers these days sometimes as well?
Yeah, exactly.
It's unfortunate, bro.
It is. It's a dearth of honor, unfortunately. We've let ourselves... Well, I call them the old ways. We've moved away from the old ways. Alhamdulillah, there are still pockets of the world where we still live by rules. And you have to look at why particular regions of the world have a conveyor belt of strong men who've gone through thousands of years, living in the same conditions. And they're always hard and tough men. But if unfortunately, people have just moved away from the old ways, and they've become. It's a really sad state of affairs, unfortunately.
I mean, substance, isn't it, bro? Yeah, and that's lost, and unfortunately, it's lost amongst the Muslims as well these days. These ideas now that we're starting to get into, and I think this is an important discussion. And we should probably spend a few minutes and wrap up on this, which is because next week we're going to start looking at Islam as the antidote, right? Or the solution, and this is going to be in 2 parts. One is going to be, okay, how does Islam answer this crisis and bring people out of it? But the second part is going to be, well, how do you now be a Muslim in the context that we live in today? And what does it mean to be a Muslim? And some of the things that seem lost are these things that made the great men of the past, right? Honor, connection with Allah, not running after the dunya. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned wahan, right? Love of the dunya and fear of death. So the dunya is it's a key theme that plays. You mentioned a few narrations where dunya was mentioned as the thing that corrupts and slows down and decays and breaks down society and individuals as well. And this is a very interesting play, bro, because if you look at the whole modern secular enterprise, it's one of its main objectives is to get you to focus on the dunya, the material world, and lose yourself in it. Right? So don't worry about studying ethics and morals, and don't worry about honor and just enjoy yourself, have fun, live the life, build the life, gain the life, do all of this stuff. But when you look at Islam and what it teaches about what a Muslim is or a mu'min is, a believer is, it's not just someone who believes in Allah, and prays 5 times a day. We see the epitome of a Muslim in the Prophet ﷺ and the companions and those that came after. right? And when you study these people's lives, you see these were refined people, right? They were people of honor, they were people of virtue, morals, ethics, principles, right? They had genuine love and concern for one another, right? And their people, right? The leaders, was it Umar? I can't remember who the story about the lady not being able to feed her son.
Yeah, that was Umar.
Yeah, and he carried the foodstuffs himself, and he didn't let anyone help him because he knew the responsibility he had, right? These were the leaders of the past, right? So there's a lot to learn from this, and a lot we need to unpack and revive for ourselves as well, and for the youth. Because remember, the condition of our youth today, generally speaking, one is the worldview that's engulfing them, right? Which is getting them to focus on the dunya, on the worldly stuff, forget about the other stuff. And the second thing is, we live in a time of instant gratification, where people don't want to make the effort, don't want to sacrifice, don't want to put in hard work and do difficult things, right? The age of the internet and technology, all of these things are to make things easy for human beings. But the negative outcome of that is people are becoming lazy, right? I mean, think about the sort of average lifestyle of a 18-year-old or a 16-year-old, right? What is it? It's school, gaming, right? Spending time with friends maybe, fizzy drinks, right?
Media.
Social media, and sleep, rinse and repeat. That's all it is.
And even friends, if they have friends, then that's a positive. But
Exactly. They don't even socialize these days.
Yeah, they
it's
don't
on
know
the
how to
phone,
talk.
it's screen.
Yeah.
It's like Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I mean, the millennials were bad enough, us guys, and those before. But now it's like most people are spending most of their life on a screen, and it's false reality, bro, right? Because when you're engaging on this digital sphere, one, your relationships aren't real because you're just reading words and comments on a screen. For all you know, it could be AI that's writing that stuff, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference because there's no real person you're engaging with. Secondly, it's creating a false sense of reality, like what is a good life. You see some of these rich and famous popular YouTubers driving fast cars, living the life. Obviously the lives aren't really like that. That's what they're showing people. Some of these guys are depressed and on the verge of committing suicide, right?
They end up dying.
Yeah, but they create this false impression, and people, the youth, just latch onto it like, oh, I want to be like this. And when they can't be like that, in most cases they can't, then they become depressed, right? And then most people are defining them seeking validation through likes and shares.
This guy just, some pop star, he fell off a balcony, was drunk or he was on drugs.
Liam Payne, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
this
so
guy just
unfortunate,
10 days ago or so.
So unfortunate. And this is the stuff our youth are watching. And remember, our youth are watching the same stuff as other youth, non-Muslim youth are watching, right? They're not exempt from this. They're seeing the same stuff online.
And the problem is with the role model crisis as well. So in current life, we don't have these living role models that our Muslim youths can follow. All of them follow these missing things and like Ronaldo and this and that. We have very little, like Muhammad Salah and this and that.
Yeah.
But why we don't have our role models? Why we don't look up at our role models? Like we should have people in all these areas. Like we should have Elon Musk ourselves. We should have some people like
So these things we need to unpack. Like we can go. It's an interesting discussion as to why do young people follow these people. So there's something that they're portraying or showing, which is engaging these young people, right?
Alhamdulillah, there is though, if you look at the one positive is the Caucasus, the fighters from the Caucasus, and they're good role models, and Habib and Hamza Chamayev, people like that, and the people are gravitating towards these people. And when they describe their lives, they're very stoic, they're disciplined, they have honor. They mashallah,
There was that boxer that won that championship fight. The first thing he went and done is go pray in the masjid. First thing he did after winning.
So that's good. At least there's some good stuff.
There are some good role models coming through,
we should
alhamdulillah.
have more of them.
Yeah.
We should have more in every field, like football, like technology, like everything.
Yeah. So we're going to start unpacking this more, inshallah, in the next 2 sessions now. We're done with the history of this stuff, where we are, why we're here. We looked at the crises. Now we're going to look at, how Islam provides a solution. But it's one thing having, Allah has outlined this for us. He's given us the answers. There is no crisis anymore. But it's another thing acting upon it and acting according to it, right? So it's one thing to know Allah created you to worship Him, it's another thing to worship Him, right? And I think the bigger problem people are having, both are problems. One, people don't have this knowledge, right, or these answers. Even being Muslim, they're not taught Islam like this. But the second thing is, they don't act upon it once they get that knowledge. I mean, just think about this and reflect upon this, I guess, for next session. Allah has told us that He created us to worship Him. Okay? Now, if someone just knows this and doesn't do this, what does it mean about that person?
He's disobeying his creator.
Yeah. I mean, it's a question mark whether they're Muslim, if they're not worshipping Allah.
They're not fulfilling their purpose.
Yeah. You know, so this thing we said last time, having one foot in this boat and one foot in that boat, you know, that needs to change. Because you can't, you know, being a Muslim, I know it's hard, it's difficult, but you can't have one foot in this sort of godless, secular style of life and one foot in the religious style of life. Because that way, you're not going to go anywhere, you know.
They are in more problem than the non-believers.
Yeah.
Because their fitra will question their
then there's this internal, conflict.
Conflict, that's the problem.
And that becomes one reason why, because I've spoken to many Muslims with doubts, right? And one of the main things that always comes up time and again is, Islam said this, I wanted to do this, so there's a contradiction internally. Islam is telling me to do this, I'm enjoying this, I want to do this. So people don't like this dissonance. It's called cognitive dissonance, this internal psychological struggle. Humans don't like that, so they look for balance. Now there's two things you can do in this scenario. One is to realize that what you're doing and you're enjoying is not right, and make the effort to stop doing that and start doing the right thing. Or the second thing you could do is keep doing the wrong thing and enjoying yourself the easy way, and find a reason not to believe in Islam. Right? And most people, unfortunately, because of the laziness and because they don't want to make the effort, even just unconsciously, they start to look for excuses as to why Islam isn't true. So they can distance themselves from Islam and keep enjoying themselves and not have this cognitive dissonance. Right? So these are issues that exist. And we'll discuss these more, inshallah, next session. May Allah bless you guys. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.